Welcome to the Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. My name is Dr. Adriana Popescu. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and leader in the field of mental health, energy psychology, addiction, trauma, and empowerment. In this podcast, we will be exploring mental health from a variety of perspectives, from the spiritual to the shamanic and beyond. What if mental illness isn't everything we think it is? What if everything we see as a pathology is actually a possibility? What else is possible with mental health? Hi, everyone. Dr. Adriana Popescu here with you today with another episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. I am really excited to have with me today two guests, Elaine Culverwell and Noah Gray. Elaine is a proud Enneagram Type 9 who is a marriage and family therapist with a private practice here locally in the Bay Area in Fremont, California. She's a certified Enneagram instructor and has worked with the Enneagram for almost 30 years, leading workshops for educators, business organizations, therapists, and the general public. She uses the Enneagram with individuals, couples, parents, and teenagers in her private practice and taught the incarcerated as part of the Enneagram Prison Project, which I'd love to hear more about. Noah is a proud Enneagram 6 and a certified wellness coach who calls Cape Cod home. He received a master's degree in integrative health studies from California Institute of Integral Studies here in San Francisco. And the Enneagram is his #1 coaching tool. And he's currently on the Enneagram teacher training track with the narrative Enneagram. Welcome, Elaine and Noah.
Hi.
Hello, hello.
So glad to have you all with me today. We were just chatting a little bit before we got started here on how I actually had some early exposure to the Enneagram when I was in graduate school here in California. My therapist at the time happened to actually be a teacher of Enneagram. So I learned a lot from her, and I actually went to some of these Enneagram workshops. And so I'm excited to share this topic with the audience today. But first, I would love to hear from each of you a little bit about yourself, how you got into doing this work, what drew you to the Enneagram, and then we'll talk more about what it is and how we use it.
I guess I'll go first. I've been working with the Enneagram for about 30 years. It was introduced to our family because my sister and brother both lived in Berkeley, and that was sort of the hotbed of early Bay Area Enneagram work. And they brought a book about the Enneagram to a family weekend. And it was incredibly invaluable for understanding myself, but also my family better. So although at the time I was a teacher, I taught both junior high and high school and psychology in high school. I wasn't a therapist yet. So the first usage for me was with my family and with myself. And one of the things, I'll just give you an example. I identified myself as a type 9, which I am. And one of the big avoidances of type 9, and this is one of the uses of the Enneagram, is to look at what we tend to avoid. And boy, right on the mark, it described me. And what I tended to avoid was conflict. And so I started noticing. I just started noticing how uncomfortable I was with conflict, started paying attention, started slowly, really slowly at first, to make changes. But I'll tell you, I have come in the last 30 years from a place of avoiding conflict anytime I could to Noah and I now teach a class called The Gift of Conflict. And so I'm still a 9, but I'm a very different version of a 9 after the work of all this time. And the Enneagram is just an incredibly helpful guide, not just saying, here's what you are, but also saying, look at what you could be if you choose to pay attention to what's going on for you. So I became a therapist about 20 years ago and use it in my therapy all the time. And clients love it because it's very non-blaming. It's non-judging. It's just say, look, notice, do you see these things coming up for you? And are they serving you or are they not? So it's the passion of my life.
I love that, Elaine, that you said that we can use this as a tool to grow, because what I have seen sometimes with some of these like typology systems, whether it's astrology or numerology or, you know, Enneagram or human design or all these different, you know, amazing modalities that are out there. Sometimes what I see with people is that they say, well, because I'm a 9 or a 6 or whatever, therefore I am this way, and that's not going to change. But I love that you have the piece in there where there's room for growth and evolution.
And we talk about growth edges, sort of now that you know your type, you've been observing, where we do monthly support groups for some of the types, for 1s, 2s, 4s, 6s, and 9s. And we always ask people, where's your growth edge for the next month? What is that one thing? And sometimes just having one thing to pay attention to can make an incredible difference in your life.
Amazing. And Noah, how about you? Tell us about you.
Well, you were way ahead of me right there. And since I was going to say snaps to Elaine, because she's a very different 9 today than she was. And that's the whole name of this game, right? And I'm working on that myself as an Enneagram 6 with a 7 wing. So I ran into the Enneagram for the first time when I was getting trained as a coach at the California Institute of Integral Studies. There was just a small module on the Enneagram, and I could never quite get it out of my head after that. So while Elaine as a 9 is in what we call in this system the body triad, where the impressions of the body are really big, I'm in what's called the head triad. It's all about the mental space, your thoughts and imaginings and so forth. And my imaginings before meeting the Enneagram were pretty much that life, the world, the universe is chaos. It's just a bunch of random, disordered, scary chaos, and you could never pin it down. And then I met the Enneagram, and that statement that I had lived by started to seem progressively more false, that, you know, there was organizing brushstrokes to what I was looking at as a chaotic state, you know? So that was just, I could never get away from it after that, because it, you know, it helps my 6ness in the sense of 6s want to feel safe. This helps me feel like the chaos of the universe has some palpable shape to it, you know? Yeah.
Wonderful. So can you all tell us a little bit about how the Enneagram came to be? It's based on some kind of ancient traditional wisdom. Like, how did it come to the West? How did it come to us having access to? We have books, we have courses, we have trainings. Like, it's really evolved a lot in the last, even, I don't know, 20 years or so that I've been aware of it. Tell us about the history. I'm
going to give you a little bit. It's not absolutely known. It's what is known is in the 1970s, a couple of psychologists, actually, no one knows more of the facts than I do. I know it is thought to be based on ancient wisdoms from all different religions, particularly maybe in the Sufi religion. I heard it once described to me as that it was a way to look at how you might be separated from God. So there are spiritual aspects to the Enneagram, but in the 70s, it was brought by these psychologists to use as a typography to really help understand. And I agree with what you said earlier. Typographies can be great. I think this is the greatest of them all, because it really can show you where you've been, where you are, where you could be, and why. So I'll let Noah fill in any other history knowledge that he has, but then I have a really simple but important way to describe how it works.
Okay, yeah. So my kind of breakdown of how this, you know, whole thing works is that really we're looking at a symbol and a system that are speaking towards energetic movement, transformation, change, right? And that's across all things. So this is a map of energy, movement, and transforming that you can use on all kinds of things. You know, the disintegration of a star to bringing a product to market to any kind of thing, right? Supposedly this map can be used to chart the movements of the energy. So when we say the Enneagram of personality, we're talking about all of that energy movement applied to human psychological energy, right? But bottom line, the sort of more Sufi origins and that area that Elaine was talking about, sort of the Eastern origins of all this are the much more spiritual take, the much more waking up from your walking slumber, the very spiritual take. And a gentleman by the name of George Gurdjieff, actually, I'm not sure how much of a gentleman he was, but he brought the system from the East over towards the West. And that's where it was expounded upon by Oscar Ichazo and Claudio Naranjo are two really great, important names for how it sort of transferred from the spiritualism mostly to spiritualism and psychology, the powers of those combined. Yeah.
Yes. And so, go ahead. Yes, Elaine, you were going to say something.
I'm glad talked about energy, because it's our work and how we work with people is based on a couple of very simple ideas. That is, all human beings have beliefs about the world they're in. And so Noah's belief as a 6 has more to do with, it's a scary place out there and bad things can happen. As a 9, my worldview is more like harmony is what we need. And if there were harmony, then that would just, be great for everyone. His name just went out of my head, but, why can't we all just get along? That's a very 9 thought about wanting harmony. So we have these worldviews, and we have a tendency as human beings, as a psychologist, that to think that other people think like we do. And then we get tripped up when someone will be in the exact same situation, but see it totally differently. So what our beliefs are, then that draws our focus of attention. So my belief in harmony and wanting harmony will focus my attention on conflict, if there's conflict present, or the harmony that's in the room. That's a focus of my attention. That brings my energy. My energy and what I do and what I'm either upset about or what I'm working toward really follows that focus of attention for me as a 9. It's going to be very different for Noah as a 6, for you as an 8. And so this is one of the huge things the Enneagram just lays out for you, saying, check this out. Does your energy get triggered around these issues? Does it get triggered around these issues? So in couples work, it's just absolutely fabulous to have people coming thinking they're seeing the same world, and then helping them see your experience is totally different, but legit, not right or wrong, just different. And that's what I love about it. It's just non-judgmental.
Yeah. So could we say that the Enneagram type that we identify with, in a sense, is a lens through which we see ourselves in the world? Would that be a good way to describe it?
Yeah. I mean, we could take the word lens and even replace it with the word filter, right? Mm. We have so much data at the narrative Enneagram where Elaine and I were trained. I remember them talking about there are so many bits of data coming at us in a day, and our brains could process it all silently, or a lot more of it silently, but not all of it, right? So there has to be some kind of selective process, and the filter for all that incoming information, that's your type. For me, I tend to ignore or filter out a lot of the incoming information that says the world is safe and okay. And there's plenty of it out there, right? I select or filter for the information that says threat is everywhere. Hazard is, in front of your next step, waiting for you, right? I filter for information that essentially affirms that worldview, Yeah.
You should tell her your Coke bottle story.
Yes, so this is how literal this filter is, right? So when I say that I'm filtering my, the data comes in and my filter highlights all the hazard, I mean it like this. My 6ness will be, I'll be walking down the street and I'll see, say, a empty Diet Coke bottle turned over on the street, but I don't just see a bottle. I see, a foot coming out of the bottle and a calf coming out of the foot and a whole leg and a torso and a person, and they're falling and they're cracking their skull and the ambulance isn't getting there fast enough. And, it's very graphic, right? I'm not giving you all the gory details here.
Yes.
That all happens within, I would say, like a quarter of a second. Coke bottle, ambulance sirens. There's almost no space between them. And so, that's how strong this filter is, that it kind of will transpose the idea of hazard onto whatever is in front of me. you know?
And I always use the example when I was teaching AP psychology and we were doing our unit on perception. I would show the kids a video and I would say, now what I want you to watch for is you're going to see two basketball teams. I want you to watch for how many times the black shirted team bounces the ball. I turn on the video. That you're probably familiar with this story where I'm going. They'll watch the video. I turn it off and say, how many times? 15. Great. How many of you saw the woman with the umbrella walk through the court? What woman? What umbrella? I'd play it back and they're shadowy, but very, very clear. Is this woman walking through with an umbrella? And then I would say, why didn't you see that? And this is also a way of looking at the filter. When we focus on a particular thing, we miss other things. And so as an Enneagram type, it's just like watching for one aspect, like Noah watches for danger. I watch for conflict or harmony. And we don't realize we're doing this. And so understanding the Enneagram just opens this entire world to people who are hoping to become more self-aware or wanting to understand the people they love and live with and work with better. So it's just an amazing tool to learn about these huge differences between us and how we're walking through the world.
Yeah. Yes. And I know that also people are using the Enneagram in work situations, right? Because so oftentimes on a team or with a boss and their employees, like there can be conflict or there can be this miscommunication. Like, again, like, why aren't you getting what I'm saying here? And so they're using it in these even corporate kinds of settings, I've heard.
Noah, do you want to speak to this?
So I'm a coach. I myself am not a therapist. I'm a health and wellness coach, right? So I'm not clinical on any level. And that really makes me want to sort of shout the message from the rooftops that this is for everybody who helps other people, or everybody who just wants to know and understand other people. So, yes, of course, your therapists, your coaches, your social workers, counselors, but, all the way down to, guidance counselor, teacher at school. If you work with a lot of people, know a lot of people, and have to kind of get along with everybody, boy, is this just, or you help a lot of people, this is just invaluable, yeah.
And two things about the workforce or in the business world. A wonderful company would be a company that had all 9 types. So you have type 2s who are the helpers, the givers. They're the ones who knows everybody's birthday and is sure that there's some celebration of relationships and the human beings in the group. Then you have the 7s who are known for their ability to have wonderful, new, interesting ideas, creative ideas. And then you have the 3s who are my goal is to follow through and get it done. So when the visionaries are through with their vision and bored with this and off to someone else, you've got the follow through person. So having all these types is really important. And by knowing the Enneagram, because both Noah and I have done work with companies, knowing the Enneagram allows you to have patience for people who aren't like you. So that in the workforce, like my husband knew about the Enneagram from me. He's nowhere near he calls me the 24/7 Enneagram person. And his interest is much smaller than mine. But when he had a boss who was an 8, who scared a lot of people because 8s are direct and sort of big in their energy, he noticed his boss one time when my husband worked in research, not surprising for the 5 that he is, because they are a head type and like information. He was presenting a project and his boss kind of came at him, as 8s might do, to challenge him. Like, do you really know your stuff? But he noticed, and I don't know if you can see this because I have my self-view off, his boss was going like this. And he noticed that hand and we talked about it. And I said, he wants to empower you. He wants you to come back. 8s want to have worthy opponents and people who are willing to fight for their ideas. So instead of being intimidated, he learned to come and present his ideas with all his information, and his boss let him do almost anything he wanted. So that knowledge, not only can the boss have that knowledge to help with his employees, but employees, it can really help you work with people that might otherwise be difficult for you to work with.
That's wonderful. Now, a couple of questions that I have. One, how does one become their Enneagram type? Like, is it thought that you're just kind of born that way? Is it your family you grew up in? Because as an 8, I can tell you my father was also an 8, a very strong 8. And I know that in some way that impacted me as well. So what do you all teach about how we develop these styles of, or filters, or whatever we want to call them?
Noah?
Yeah, I mean, I've got sort of the opposite tale from you, Adriana, which is that we're essentially looking at, I'm a self-preservation 6, which meaning my subtype is self-preservation. And if you look at the totem pole of types and subtypes, you could argue that that's at the bottom as far as confidence, sureness, right? Yet both my parents would seem to be 8s, the most confident and assured type on the Enneagram, right? So it's like, why didn't I soak that up, right? But so that would kind of be evidence in my book for, I think, how we're both thinking, myself and Elaine, which is that the raw content of your type, you're born with that. It's just not going to start to look like personality preoccupations until, you know, some kind of fall from grace happens, some kind of, I'm not sure the world is as good as I thought, or as safe, or as, you know, or maybe it's this or that or the other. And I'm, okay, now I have to question, what, you know, what's this world about really? That moment is kind of how I think of where personality, the way we think of it, sort of comes online, right? And there was essence, more of essence qualities before the personality came online, but usually they're the essence qualities very much tied to the same number as whatever personality comes online. So, you know, I'm described sort of in my little youth and toddlerhood as the essence qualities of this type. And then as I grow older, I become sort of the very heavily identified, preoccupied version of this energy. You know?
Yeah. And I will say that over the whole teachings of the Enneagram, there's been a pendulum swing, and it's gone back and forth between nature and nurture. Mm-hmm. Right now, especially with so much brain science available, because they are noticing things in brains about differences in type, such as 5s are actually the most sensitive of all the types. And it's one reason they tend to withdraw, because their brains are more impacted by loud noises, bright lights, things. So there are some brain indications of type. But I also believe that that we are born a type, and sort of how heavy our life is, or what kind of things we go through in our lives, makes a difference in how tightly you hold on to these characteristics. So my father was an 8, and none of the rest of the 4 children nor my mother were 8s. But much to his disappointment, I think, we weren't all out there challenging the world like he was. But there were some things having an 8 father that me as a 9 wanting harmony, no conflict, made really difficult. So I sort of clung to my 9 tendencies and my 9 strategies, which now I find totally not useful. I mean, I still want everybody to get along, but I see the value in confrontation, which an 8 absolutely knows. I see the value in speaking out instead of being more muted and silent. And so I think, like Noah was saying, this sort of sense of our personality has a lot to do with our experiences in life, how tightly we hold on. And then the Enneagram is this fabulous gift to say, okay, if that's not working for you, look at the ways you can have a much more fulfilling, essence-filled life when you make these changes.
So, Elaine, that makes me want to ask you specifically a little bit more about kind of the psychological applications of the Enneagram, because as you were talking just now, I was thinking about trauma, for example,
yes,
right?
Yes.
People, especially when they have early life trauma, clearly they're going to, develop some defense mechanisms, perhaps, or some strategies for coping given the experiences that they've had. And so can you say more a little bit about that?
Well, different things trigger different types. I have to say that abuse, whether it's sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, that is going to traumatize everybody, no matter what type you are. How you react to it may be very tied to type. So we want to look at, so can I use 8s as an example?
Yes, please do. Yeah.
Okay. 8s have this view of the world, that the world is a tough place and the strong survive. So with that comes a lot of energy around strength and power. They're very aware of who has power and control in a room, in a situation. And I can remember a woman on a tape saying one time, who was an 8, she said, I observe first, and if I think I have the power, I'll go for the jugular right away. and so she has a way of being in the world. But one of the things we know about 8s is what they avoid is any sense of being either weak or vulnerable. Because in a world that's tough, to be weak and vulnerable would just be the world's worst thing, because how will I survive? So in therapy, if I know someone is an 8, that's a place I'm going to go gently, but I'm going to be aware that this person who may have gone through some trauma, that the theme of power, of control, of your own ability to direct your life, your own ability to have control over your own life may be hugely powerful factors in why you are in my office at this moment. For another type, it might be something very different. And one of the things I love about the Enneagram in the last 20 years is the narrative Enneagram, the organization that Noah and I belong to. They have brought on hugely the somatic piece, finding where the trauma is. And a lot of therapists know about Peter Levine's work and other work about the body speaking. But in the Enneagram work, we sort of are looking for what might be particular traumas of the type. And where it might be the greatest. So for example, my niece and I were just having a 3-hour therapy session on a drive home from Tahoe. And she was talking about, Noah mentioned the subtypes. There are 3 subtypes, overlays over all 9 types of our survival needs, what we think we need to survive. And she told me 2 stories. She's a 9 like myself. At night, she was the youngest. She would go to bed. They would put her to bed early. And then she would hear laughter and arguments going on between her parents and her sister. She would put herself right up by the door where her ear could be by the space under the door, so she could be a part as best she could, because she's a social subtype. She had no idea before we had this conversation. And she said she had a dream when she was young of her standing on one side of a huge body of water and her family standing on the other side, and she could not connect with them. The trauma of this really had to do with subtype issues, being a social subtype and having herself separate from the group that was her core family group. So it just gives us a tremendous amount of information that we can then quickly go to. It's like someone said, well, learning the Enneagram is worth about 6 months of therapy, because it guides you right away to the possibilities. It's not going to say everything about what you're bringing into my office is about the Enneagram, but boy, does it bring a lot of stuff to light, or at least as an area to go to. So trauma can be generalized. It can also be very specific, or how you deal with trauma can be very type related.
Wow, fascinating. Noah, can you tell us more about, so Elaine mentioned there were subtypes, there's also wings, there's also these little arrows going from one number to another. It's a very complex system. Without going into too much detail, tell us just a little bit about what those things are and what information does it give us?
Yeah, so we'll borrow a little bit from what Elaine just said. You've got the core 9 types, which are the world viewpoint, right? Now you have overlaid on that the 3 instincts Elaine just described of, wanting to stay alive, self-preservation, or maybe she didn't describe all 3, I forget.
I didn't.
Wanting to stay alive, self-preservation, the survival of the body, right? Shelter, food, warmth. And then there's, the survival of your social self. You want to be part of the community, part of the group, have a good reputation, good social standing, right? That's a whole nother survival-based drive to be included. And then there's the survival drive for closeness and bonding. So what we would call the one-on-one drive, evoked anytime it's, a pair of lovers, the mother and the baby, the 2 best friends hanging out together. That's all the one-on-one energy, right? Sort of a straight line, energetic shape, right? So the drive to stay alive, the drive to belong with the community, and the drive to have intimate bonds with individual others, those 3 instincts overlay on the 9 numbers to give us what we would think of as 27 subtype variations, instinctual subtype variations, right? Now, if any subtype of any number could also have one of 2 wings, right? So I'll give myself as an example. I'm a 6, that's my core type. My subtype is self-preservation, so the survival of the body more than the social standing or the one-on-one interactions, right? And then I have a 7 wing. So I'm a little bit more, we could look at this as like a color wheel almost, where they would fade into each other a little bit. So 6 is kind of composed of a little bit of 7 and a little bit of 5 in a way. And I can tell that I'm more over here on my kind of, there's more of the 7-ness blended into my 6 on the little color palette, as opposed to the 5. So we're getting really nuanced. Just that puts 54 cards in the deck, I like to say. If you have 9 types multiplied by 3 instinctual variants, multiplied by 2 possible wings for anybody, that's 54 type combinations. So there's a lot of nuance here, right? But then you've got the lines. The lines are a whole different conversation from everything else I just said, right? The lines are about state change. Everything else, subtypes have a little bit of state change element in there too, but the lines really speak to the movement and transformation of energy. So basically for human psychological energy, stress, right? That's putting more pressure on the system, right? Comfort, joy, happiness, right? That means the system is not so pressurized, right? So the classical thinking is that there's a stress line and a security line. For me as a 6, it would be that I would be in security at 9 and I would be in stress at 3. I see what everybody was getting at when they called them those things, because this idea of pressurizing the system, it's very relevant. Usually when you pressurize me, I'm made more under the gun, I tend to go here. But sometimes I try to reach for this for security and comfort. So it's not really as simple as security and stress, or disintegration and integration, right? We like to think of these as resource points. So on each line, you'll find useful resources for your issues of your core type. So for me as a 6, there are core preoccupations and issues here that really need looking at and working with. And there is help to deal with those issues over here. So I can borrow some of the chill from 9s to try to balance out the anxiety of my 6-ness, which is high, right? I can also get some of this task orientation and confidence from the 3s of, look at me shine. I don't have to over humble myself just to survive, right? Which 6s are sometimes guilty of. So there's a lot of commentary on changing states with the lines. Things are shifting for you, but also things you can bring back with you from your connected territories to help you kind of work with your core type,
And I'll add a couple little things. I'm up there on the chart as a 9. Our wings are just the 2 types that are next to us. So any number you are, if you just think of, your wings are right next to you here on your shoulders, those 2 types. Most of my life, I have a much stronger 1 wing, and ones sometimes are called perfectionists, but because their standards are so high, they don't think of themselves as perfect. but I can be very perfectionistic. Like, you know, that Coke bottle that he saw the person dying in the ambulance. I see it as those people should pick it up. They're not only littering, but they're not recycling. Right. So we have a very different view of the Coke bottle. Yeah. I'm trying, as I have been more comfortable with confrontation, I'm really working on being more eight-like, being more willing to be in a situation that I would have shied from the past. So I'm actually working on pulling some eight into just the way I am around the world. I'm a part of what's called an Enneagram learning community, and we meet twice a year for 3 days for a deep dive into an Enneagram topic. And over the years, I really see myself as having changed as a result of all of this work and this conversation. And I see everyone else, the other 35 people in this group, changing as well. And so I almost have a feeling that we started off, if you sort of described us as this circle on the floor, very separate types. But as we have all grown and learned, we're sort of spiraling up to being very similar. And it's sort of a sense of, we do have all these characteristics. Now more of them are showing up, that when I was kind of held tightly into my 9-ness, I didn't see my 8-ness, my 7-ness, my 4-ness. Now it's like, that's all available to me. So it's another way to use the Enneagram to grow, to specifically say, I'm lacking something. And this offers me something that I can see. I also wanted to mention the word Enneagram comes from the Greek word ennea for 9. So people go, what a strange name. I just wanted to be sure I mentioned that.
Yes, thank you. I'd forgotten that. I love what you said right before that too, the sort of with the evolution, because it reminds me of like Carl Jung's work, right? I mean, the whole Myers-Briggs typology was sort of based on his work. And the idea with that is not that you're just going to stay, primarily being an extrovert. You want to develop the other side of that polarity, your introverted side. If you are a thinker, you want to develop the feeling aspects so that you can have more balance, right? And so the Enneagram has that similar kind of, we want as an evolved person to have qualities of all 9 and probably all the subtypes and stuff as well, right?
And as you bring in Jung, there's a real connection between archetypes and types. So for example, type 2 as the giver, the helper, is sort of an archetype of women, and yet there are as many male 2s. So sometimes people kind of are taken aback when something that seems to be more gender oriented actually is there equally in all gender types. And but we may not give as much credit for, I know you may have experienced this as a female 8, and I don't know how you gender yourself, but normally 8s are kind of quickly thought of as men, but there are very, very strong women who, as 8s, they want to go and power the world and be in there empowering others. And so sometimes people can kind of be caught off by that, but all genders are in all types. And so it's important to see really where people are coming from rather than something that just might seem typical. And there's a word I just went out of my head. I'll let that go, which is sort of less typical, stereotypical versus non-stereotypes.
Yeah, like the neurodivergent, movement and all of that. Yeah, I love that. And you're also reminding me too of like the evolution within type, because 8s can get a bad rap, and
absolutely.
And I remember like one of my teachers saying, well, look, you can be an 8 that's like a Genghis Khan, or you can be an 8 who's like, I don't know, some really like a Martin Luther King, or somebody who's, really there for humanity versus like like what I would call kingdom of me and my wants. I'm going to get whatever I want versus kingdom of we. Like I, as an 8, really am interested in empowering everyone. And,
Yes.
and I'm not interested in dominating everyone. That's not, that was more my dad's style. And I've sort of evolved from that maybe earlier in life and really now more interested in kind of empowering humanity. So I can see how even within type, you can evolve over time or working on yourself or whatever it is.
Yeah. That's what we're saying with the idea of essence qualities versus personality based qualities, right? For 8ness as the example, you know, protectiveness and empowering people, those are part of the essence qualities, right? Controlling and dominating, not so much. That's exclusively the personality based realm, you know. But speaking toward the word balance, which I think is the word that you picked a minute from Elaine, I like to point out that the Enneagram system is all about balancing 3s rather than balancing 2s. So like the Jungian stuff, you know, introversion, extroversion, all that, it's kind of about balancing 2s, right? The yin and the yang. The Enneagram is sort of about the yin and the yang, and then the reconciling force from the interaction of the 2, creating sort of a trinity effect. So you can see the triangle right there in the middle of the diagram. So we already talked about the subtype energies of you want the survival of the body, belonging with the community, and then one-on-one intimacy with individual others. So we all have one of those that tends to kind of eat up the energy of the other 2, our dominant instinct, right? So we want to balance those 3, kind of have an instinctual stool where you're sitting on 3 even legs, right? And the same thing would apply in Enneagram world to our forms of intelligence. So we haven't done this yet here today, but there are 3 triads in the Enneagram based on your primary center of intelligence. So 8s, 9s, and 1s are in the body triad, meaning that they use the intelligence of the body, the gut, right? Kinesthetics, instinctive awareness, kind of the knowing beyond knowing, right? Yeah. It's not necessarily based on strict data, right? The intelligence of the heart triad, which is types 2, 3, and 4, they're working with that emotional intelligence, right? These are 3 very emotionally fluent types. And even if they're not necessarily fluent with their own emotions in a given context or a given type, they're usually pretty fluent at kind of digesting other people's emotions and using that as they navigate, right? And then we have the head triad over here, where the primary center of intelligence is, you know, the mental area, right? Not the gut, not the feelings, but what do I think? What do I believe with my sort of paradigms? So if you are in any given triad, obviously we're saying that that's the center that's dominant for you. Head triad is dominant over here, body, and then heart for these 3. But in an ideal world, you wouldn't have a dominant form of intelligence. You would use all 3 split in thirds, you know? Your mind, your heart, and your body would all be firing sort of in equal parts, right? None of them sucking up the energy of the others. So balance is a game of 3 as far as the Enneagram is concerned, usually. Yeah.
So as we start to move toward winding this down, the question I wanted to ask each of you is, in your domain as a coach and as a therapist, what would you suggest, like for someone who's wanting, like a professional, a healing professional who might be interested in learning more about this system? Like, what have you found to be the benefits of using the Enneagram in your work?
For me, and can I plug a workshop we have coming up?
Yes.
Very shortly on Friday, August 19th, we have an introduction to the Enneagram class that is geared for therapists, counselors, coaches, whatever. It's our normal introduction class, but all the examples we use have to do with what shows up in a therapist's office for each type. So it's not the only thing that shows up, but our examples will all be things that have to do with mental health and helping clients and noticing yourself as a therapist, how your own type might influence this. So we have this class coming up on August 19th from 9 to 4. And I think you're going to put our contact information where our website is the Enneagram Anytime, all one word, .com. And then in September, we have a class specifically geared for subtypes. And it's not just for therapists, everyone can learn about that. So I use the Enneagram as a tool for any client that walks in. I describe it a little bit. Usually this is maybe the end of the first day I'm seeing someone, and say, here's a tool. I describe it a little bit, send them home with some paragraphs that describe each of the 9 types. And then we have that there sitting kind of as a companion in our therapy work to look at, is this an issue that you as a 9 is feeling most deeply? Or is this something that could be common for a 4 or whatever? And knowing the things that come up in therapy. So for example, the feeling of abandonment for 4s. I know that is a word that can trigger many 4s because of various things. So I don't shy away from those things. I will go right at them. And just like before I said, knowing the Enneagram can be worth about 6 months of actual work to figure out what's going on. I also had a student, because I've taught the Enneagram many times to high school students, who eat it up. It's a fabulous tool if you're working with teens, because again, there's not the what did you do wrong? It is, who are you? How are you in the world when you may have these parents who are so different from you? What a help that is. You mean they don't hate me? They were just very different types who are moving through the world. And Noah went like this because so many people in couples or teams or whatever have these experiences of, you don't see me, you don't know me, and I don't know myself. So the Enneagram just gives us tremendous help. And as a therapist, I still do somatic work. I do CBT. I do, huge number of different strategies. I'm somebody who uses lots of different modalities, but the Enneagram is always there as a guide of what might be coming up. Does that answer your question?
It does. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. And Noah, how about for you?
So I guess I would have sort of a two-sided answer. As far as when I'm thinking of myself as the client or for the client side of the interaction, handles to grab onto for what's going on inside of you. Terminology, names to give to sort of the inner workings and how it all has a very specific, everything relates to everything in very intentional ways. And there's names for all those relationships of what's going on inside. These are, I also like to think of these as 9-word dumps, where you can kind of put language and terminology that's really relevant towards a particular aspect of being human in each of these sort of piles, these 9 areas, right? So, being able to name everything about your habits, your work, what's going on in your relationships, that's so huge. But then from the sort of practitioner side of things, when I'm working with a client, this just feels so valuable for what's going on, the tone of what's going on and differentiating it between types. So again, I'm not a clinician over here. I don't treat, I don't diagnose, but in the instances of people feeling, we'd say anxious or depressed, maybe on a non-clinical level even, and with my coaching clients, a good example I like to give, the type 4 depression is sort of this very visceral, sort of like raw nerve kind of tone to it more often than not. Type 9s also report depression, plenty, talk to lots of 9s who have that, but it's sort of noted as this dissociated depression, like this sort of very flat, not visceral in the same way as the 4s. So it's like the 4, they're kind of coming more and more alive to the experience as depression comes on, whereas 9s tend to fade away as the depression comes on, So having the same thing with the same name going on for different personalities, you can just see that it takes a different tone, and I find that really incredibly helpful,
Yeah, because then you can really tailor your interventions to kind of match what their tone is, right?
Yeah.
It gives you more information to work with. So
Yeah.
It is a really beautiful system and so intricate. And I know so many people love using it, both as the client and as the therapist or healer coach. So it's really wonderful that we've been able to have this conversation today. I'm so grateful that you guys came on and shared your wisdom with us and the audience. You've named your website. If people want to find you, can you go ahead and say that again?
Enneagram Anytime. And one of the reasons we like that title is it helps remind people how to pronounce Ennea. So
Yeah.
EnneagramAnytime.com. And then we have information about the Enneagram. We also have a list of all our events and things that are going on. And we're just growing our calendar, but we usually offer one class a month that's open to anybody. For therapists, I'm a CEU provider. So a really wonderful thing is if someone came to this class from California on the 19th, they could earn 6 CEUs. And then we have our type groups once a month of support. And you would not believe the deep conversations we have with a group of 2s or a group of 6s or a group of 9s. It is so validating to be with other people like you. So I do want to encourage people, if they already know their type and they're looking, where can I do some extra exploration? We offer those once a month, just for 2 hours. And those are really wonderful conversations.
Awesome. Yeah, I learned a tremendous amount when I took my workshop years ago by watching those panels of a bunch of 4s or 6s or 8s
Yes.
all together, and like, wow, you really can see how those themes run through their lives. So thank you so much, Elaine and Noah, for being with us today. Thank you, viewers and listeners, for tuning in. If you like this podcast, please do share, rate it, like it, comment on it, whatever will help us get more likes out there so more people can find it. And so people can know that there are these wonderful healing modalities and other ways to look at mental health. See you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. This has been Dr. Adriana Popescu. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share with others. To find out more about me, my guests, and more, please visit my website at adrianapopescu.org. See you next time.